The Vow of a Stranger. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a like and a comment below about what you think of this story. And don't forget to share it with someone who loves a good tale of love and new beginnings. Jilted at the altar, she never imagined that a stranger who offered her comfort would transform her life forever. Grace looked at her reflection in the mirror with a mix of nerves and pure happiness. The sparkle of her white lace dress softly brushed the floor as she made the final adjustments. Her mother, standing beside her, took her hand and whispered excitedly, "You look beautiful, honey. Today will be the best day of your life." Grace smiled, though her heart was pounding. She had been dreaming of this moment for months, of walking down the aisle and seeing Jack, the man she loved deeply, waiting for her with eyes full of emotion. The venue was decorated with white and lilac flowers, and a faint scent of jasmine floated in the air. The guests, all smiling, exchanged murmurs of admiration. Grace knew this was the beginning of her happily ever after. However, just as she was about to leave for the ceremony, an uncomfortable silence filled the lobby. The voice of her visibly pale maid of honor broke the moment. "Grace, you need to read this." In her trembling hands, she held an envelope. Grace took it, feeling a knot form in her stomach. She opened the paper slowly, as if each movement was an attempt to delay the inevitable. The words written were clear and devastating. "I can't do it. I'm sorry. Forgive me." The floor seemed to disappear beneath her feet. The air that was once filled with promises and love now weighed like a slab of stone on her chest. Her mother tried to hold her, but Grace pulled away, unable to contain the tears. The voices around her faded, replaced by a deafening hum. She couldn't understand how Jack, the man with whom she had built so many dreams, could simply abandon her. Amid the chaos, an unknown man approached with an unexpected calm. He wore an elegant dark gray suit, and his brown eyes radiated a mix of empathy and determination. "Grace, right?" he asked in a soft voice. She, with her eyes full of tears, could barely nod. "I'm Mason. I know this isn't the time or the place, but can I help you? No one should have to go through this alone." Grace looked at him, bewildered by the kindness of a stranger. Although she hesitated at first, something in his tone made her feel a little less exposed, a little less broken. "I don't want to be here," she finally murmured. Mason nodded and held out a hand. "Then let's go. You don't have to face this right now." Carefully, Mason led her out of the venue, avoiding the curious glances and murmurs of the guests. The cold evening air hit her face as they left, and Grace felt like she could breathe, though barely. Mason took her to a small, nearby cafe, where they sat at a secluded table. The silence between them was comfortable, almost necessary. After a while, Mason spoke. "I know everything seems impossible to overcome right now, but believe me, with time, things will get better. I know, because I was also abandoned once." His words, spoken with a painful sincerity, surprised Grace. For the first time in hours, she looked up to meet his eyes. There was something in them, an echo of her own sadness, but also a promise that life goes on. Grace didn't know why, but she began to talk. She told him how she had met Jack, how they had planned every detail of their wedding, how he had been her everything. Mason listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, allowing her to release the weight she was carrying. "Sometimes," he finally said, "people aren't meant to fulfill the expectations we place on them, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve more." The words resonated with Grace in a way she hadn't expected. Although her heart was still shattered, Mason's presence offered her a strange comfort, as if, for the first time that day, she wasn't completely alone. Night fell, and Mason insisted on walking her home. Before saying goodbye, he made a promise that sounded strangely firm for a man she had just met. This doesn't define who you are, Grace, and don't worry, you will get through this. I'll help you." Grace watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the darkness. She didn't understand why, but inside her, there was something more than pain. A small spark of hope was beginning to ignite, even though she couldn't yet identify it. Mason, as he walked away, clenched his fists. There was something more he hadn't told Grace, something that tied him to that wedding and that particular day. However, he decided to keep his secret, at least for now. The days that followed Grace's abandonment at the altar were a mix of pain and lethargy. Although she tried to maintain her composure, the questions and comments from those around her haunted her. In her mind, the words on Jack's note repeated themselves over and over, like an endless echo. Mason, as he promised, stayed close. Despite being practically a stranger, his constant presence had become a kind of refuge for Grace. He helped her with small gestures, running errands, fixing a broken lamp in her apartment, or simply listening when she felt the weight of the situation was unbearable. However, something strange began to happen. Grace, who had always been healthy, started experiencing dizziness and morning sickness. At first, she thought it was the accumulated stress, but the days passed and the symptoms intensified. A persistent malaise forced her to consider that it might be something more. One afternoon, after briefly fainting while walking in the park with Mason, he insisted she go to the doctor. Grace reluctantly agreed, not imagining that this visit would change everything. In the office, while the doctor reviewed the test results, Grace felt her heart pounding. The doctor looked at her with a slight smile and said, "Grace, you're pregnant." The words seemed to stop time. Grace blinked several times, trying to process what she had just heard. "Pregnant," she repeated, as if saying it out loud could confirm that it was real. On the way home, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The memory of Jack invaded her thoughts, and the pain of his abandonment mixed with confusion and fear. When she arrived at her apartment, Mason was waiting for her. He immediately noticed that something was wrong. "What happened? What did the doctor say?" he asked with genuine concern. Grace, still in shock, dropped onto the sofa. "I'm pregnant, Mason," she finally said, her voice trembling. Mason remained silent for a moment, as if he were processing the news. Then, he sat down beside her. That changes a lot of things," he finally said, in a warm, serene tone. Grace looked at him, searching for a sign of judgment on his face, but only found understanding. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know how to handle this alone." Mason took her hand and squeezed it gently. "You're not alone, Grace. No matter what, I'll be here for you. I promised, remember?" His words, though simple, brought unexpected comfort. Grace nodded, but she couldn't help but feel scared. What would happen if Jack found out? How would he react? In the following days, Mason continued to support her. He accompanied Grace to doctor's appointments and helped her prepare her apartment for the baby, even though she still hadn't fully processed what it meant to be a mother. Meanwhile, Grace couldn't help but notice something in Mason, something she hadn't seen before. Despite his always calm demeanor and his willingness to help, there were moments when he seemed distant, as if he were struggling with something he couldn't share. One night, while they were having dinner together in her small kitchen, Grace decided to confront him. "Mason, you've been incredible with me, but I feel like there's something you're not telling me. What's going on?" Mason looked at her, surprised by her direct question. For a moment, he seemed to be debating whether to tell the truth or remain silent. Finally, he took a deep breath. "It's not easy for me to be here, Grace. Seeing what you're going through reminds me of my own story. My fiancée also left me, but I never had the chance to fight for her. I lost someone I loved, and I think that's why I feel I have to be here for you, to make sure you don't go through the same thing." His words touched something deep in Grace. Although she was still dealing with her own pain, she began to understand that Mason also carried scars. Their connection, which had started as simple help, now seemed like something more meaningful, something neither of them was ready to name. That night, after Mason left, Grace stayed awake, thinking about everything that had happened. The weight of her pregnancy news was still there, but somehow Mason's presence made the burden a little lighter. However, deep down, she couldn't help but wonder what Jack would think if he discovered the truth. While Grace was struggling with her thoughts, an unexpected call interrupted her peace. When she answered, she heard a voice she didn't expect to hear again. "Grace, it's Jack. We need to talk." Grace slowly lowered the phone, her hand trembling as her mind tried to process what she had just heard. Jack's voice still echoed in her ears. "We need to talk." It was an echo of something she thought she would never have to face again. A ghost she had managed to keep at bay for weeks thanks to Mason's constant presence. But now, the emotions she believed were under control began to stir like a storm. That night, Grace barely slept. Jack's words, though brief, carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. There was something in his tone, a mix of regret and desperation, that deeply unnerved her. But along with that unease also came rage. By what right was he coming back now, after leaving her humiliated in front of everyone, alone and vulnerable? The next morning, Jack arrived at her door. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, as if trying to project an image of control that contrasted with the vulnerability in his eyes. Grace let him in, but she kept her arms crossed and her gaze firm, determined not to be carried away by the torrent of emotions his presence evoked. "Grace, I'm sorry," he began, his voice broken. "I know I have no excuse for what I did, but I was scared. The commitment, the marriage, it all overwhelmed me. I didn't want to fail you, so I ran." She let out a bitter laugh. "That's it? You ran because you were scared, and you didn't think about what that would do to me, about how you humiliated me in front of everyone." Jack lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. "I know I hurt you, and I regret it every day since. Grace, please, give me another chance. I want to fix things. I want to be with you too." The weight of those last words fell on her like a blow. "With you two?" she repeated, with disbelief in her voice. Jack nodded, taking a step toward her. "I know you're pregnant. I don't know how I found out, but I know. And I can't let you face this alone. I want to be the father our child deserves. I want to be the man you deserve." Grace felt a whirlwind of emotions. The part of her that had once loved Jack wanted to believe his words, wanted to let everything go back to the way it was before. But another part, a stronger, more confident part, could not ignore the pain he had caused her. "Jack, you can't just show up here and expect everything to be the same," she finally said, her voice filled with determination. "I'm going to have this baby, but I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if I can forget what you did." At that moment, Mason walked into the apartment, carrying a bag of groceries. He stopped when he saw Jack, and although his expression remained neutral, Grace noticed a flash of tension in his eyes. "Am I interrupting something?" Mason asked, looking at Grace. "No, Mason, it's fine," she quickly replied. "Jack and I were just talking." Mason nodded, but he didn't move, as if his presence could protect her from whatever might happen. Grace couldn't help but feel a strange comfort having him there, but she also felt the discomfort in the air. Jack looked at Mason with a mix of curiosity and distrust. "And who are you?" he asked, his tone barely hiding his dislike. "I'm a friend," Mason replied calmly, but his direct gaze seemed to challenge Jack. The tension between the two men was palpable, and Grace felt the need to intervene before the situation escalated. "Mason, thank you for bringing the groceries. We'll talk later, okay?" Mason hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded and left the apartment. However, before he left, he gave Jack one last look, a look that seemed to say, "Don't you dare hurt her again." When the door closed, Jack turned his attention back to Grace. "Who is he?" he asked, in a tone that couldn't hide his jealousy. "He's just a friend," she replied, although the words sounded strange even to her, because Mason wasn't just a friend. He was her support, her refuge, the person who had been there when she needed him most. "I hope so," Jack said, but his expression clearly showed that he wasn't convinced. Grace decided not to get into that debate. She had more important things to think about, like what to do with Jack's plea. Although a part of her wanted to believe in his regret, another part knew that trusting him again was a huge risk, not only for her, but also for the baby on the way. That night, after Jack left, Grace was left alone with her thoughts. She looked at the bag of groceries Mason had brought and wondered why his presence was so important to her. Thinking about him filled her with a calm that Jack had never been able to offer, but it also terrified her. Because admitting what she truly felt for Mason would mean facing a completely new world, a world she wasn't yet sure she was ready to accept. From the window, Grace watched Mason walking down the street, his hands in his pockets and his gaze lost, as if he too was dealing with something he didn't dare to say. The relationship between Grace and Mason had become an anchor point in recent months. His presence was constant, warm, and reassuring, as if he were the only stable piece in the chaos of her life. Mason had taken on a role that went beyond simple friendship. He was there for every doctor's appointment. He carried the grocery bags. He helped her assemble the baby's furniture, and he even cooked for her on days when the exhaustion became unbearable. He was such unwavering support that Grace couldn't help but wonder how she had been so lucky to find him. But emotions, as always, are complicated. One Saturday afternoon, while Grace and Mason were organizing a small closet they had put together, her phone rang. Mason checked it, and seeing the name on the screen, he smiled. "It's Isabella," he said, getting up quickly. "I haven't talked to her in a while. It'll be quick." Grace felt an unexpected pang in her chest. She didn't understand why that name resonated so strongly in her mind. Isabella, a woman Mason had mentioned only once, casually, as his ex-girlfriend. Grace tried to ignore it and continued folding small baby blankets, but her ears couldn't help but catch fragments of Mason's conversation from the hallway. "Yeah, sure. We can catch up this week. It'll be good to see you," Mason said, with a light laugh that Grace didn't remember hearing before. When Mason returned to the room, she pretended to be focused on the task, but her mind was full of questions she didn't dare to ask. "Everything okay?" he asked, oblivious to Grace's internal whirlwind. "Yes, of course," she replied quickly, smiling in a way she hoped looked natural. But it wasn't. Days later, Mason mentioned that he had made plans to get coffee with Isabella. He said it with the casual tone of someone sharing an unimportant detail, but Grace felt her heart race. Why did it bother her so much? Why did that discomfort follow her every time she thought of the two of them together? The answer came unexpectedly. A few weeks later, as Grace was walking in a nearby park to clear her mind, she saw Mason sitting at an outdoor table with Isabella. From a distance, the scene looked like it was from a romantic movie. Isabella was beautiful, with her perfectly styled hair and a contagious laugh that lit up Mason's face. Grace stopped, unable to move forward or backward. Something inside her broke at that moment, a mix of jealousy, confusion, and pain. She didn't understand why she felt a knot in her throat, seeing them together. Mason didn't owe her anything, and her relationship with him had always been platonic. But there she was, standing in the shade of a tree, unable to look away, wondering if Isabella could reclaim a place she might have never stopped occupying in Mason's heart. That night, Mason came by her apartment as usual, bringing a bag of groceries and a carefree smile. Grace tried to act normal, but something in her tone was different, colder, more distant. Mason noticed it immediately. "Are you okay, Gabby?" he asked, using the affectionate nickname he had adopted for her. "Yes, I'm just tired," she replied, not looking at him directly. Mason frowned but didn't insist. However, as they ate dinner, Grace couldn't help but let a question escape her lips. "How was your coffee with Isabella?" Mason, surprised by the comment, put down his utensils on the plate. "It was good. We were just catching up. Why do you ask?" Grace shrugged, trying to appear indifferent. "Just curious, I guess." "Are you sure everything is okay?" Mason insisted, leaning slightly toward her, with that look that always seemed to see beyond what Grace wanted to show. She opened her mouth to answer, but couldn't find the words. What could she say? That she was jealous of something she had no right to claim? That every time she saw him with Isabella, a part of her wanted to scream at him not to leave? Instead, she said the only thing that could come out of her mouth without revealing too much. "Just, don't forget I'm here, okay?" Mason smiled, but there was something in his gaze, a shadow of something he wasn't saying. "Gabby, I could never forget you," he replied sincerely. That night, after Mason left, Grace sat on the bed, gently stroking her belly as tears streamed down her face. She was so confused. Why did she feel this way about Mason? Was it gratitude, dependence, or something more? The baby gave a small kick, pulling her out of her thoughts. Grace looked down and smiled, but the question remained. What would she do if these feelings grew beyond what she could control? Mason, walking toward his apartment, stopped in the middle of the street. He looked back at Grace's building with an expression of conflict on his face. Could it be that he, too, was struggling with something he couldn't admit? The dim morning light filtered through the apartment curtains, but Grace found no peace in this day that had barely begun. She had spent the night awake, turning over the same thoughts that had tormented her since Mason told her about his departure. No matter how much she tried to convince herself that everything would be okay, something inside her kept screaming that losing him would be more devastating than she was willing to admit. With her belly already large and heavy, Grace lay down on the sofa, hugging a pillow as if it could soothe the knot in her chest. Her mind, unable to stop, began to review the moments she had shared with Mason, the way he always appeared when she needed him, his warm laugh that filled the apartment even on the darkest days, the way he looked at her as if he could see directly into her soul. As her thoughts were filled with memories, the phone rang. It was Jack. Grace sighed before answering. The relationship with Jack was still complicated, a mix of cordiality and distance that neither of them knew how to overcome. Although he was trying to show his regret and wanted to be a part of the baby's life, Grace felt that something had been irrevocably broken between them. "Hi, Jack," she replied in a tired voice. "Grace, how are you feeling today? I was thinking of stopping by your place later. Maybe we could go for a walk, or get something to eat," he suggested, his tone full of enthusiasm. Grace hesitated. She didn't want to be cruel, but she also couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay between them. "Thanks, but I think I'd rather stay home today. I don't have much energy," she replied, trying to sound friendly. Jack was silent for a moment before replying, his voice tinged with frustration. "I understand, but Grace, I need you to give me a chance. I know I made mistakes, but I want to fix things, For you. For our child." Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words. "Jack, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but things aren't that simple. I can't pretend that everything is the way it was before, because it's not." The conversation ended shortly after, leaving Grace even more lost in her thoughts. Why did she feel so distant from Jack? Why was it that every time she thought about the future, the image that appeared in her mind was of Mason and not of him? That afternoon, while she was trying to distract herself by organizing the small details of the baby's room, she received a text message from Mason. "Gabby, I wanted to let you know that my flight is tomorrow. If you need anything before I go, let me know, okay?" Grace's world seemed to stop as she read those words. She knew his departure was imminent, but seeing it written, so definitive, made the air in her lungs feel heavy. Mason was leaving. Tomorrow. The rest of the day passed in a fog of emotions. Grace tried to concentrate on anything but her thoughts, but every time she tried, Mason's image filled her mind. What would life be like without him? Who would be there to hold her when things got complicated? Who would be her refuge when the world felt too big and scary? That night, Grace couldn't take it anymore. She sat on the bed and let the tears flow freely. She was tired of trying to hide what she felt, even from herself, because as much as she tried to deny it, the truth was clear. She couldn't imagine her life without Mason. For the first time, she allowed herself to admit what she had been repressing for months. What she felt for Mason wasn't just gratitude or friendship. It was something deeper, more intense, something that terrified her and filled her with hope at the same time. The night passed slowly, and with each hour that went by, the fear of losing him grew. What if he left and never came back? What if she never had the opportunity to tell him how she really felt? At dawn, Grace made a decision. She couldn't let Mason leave without knowing how much he meant to her. She didn't know if he felt the same way, but that no longer mattered. All she knew was that she had to try. With her heart pounding, Grace grabbed her phone and dialed his number. But just as she was about to press the call button, she stopped. What could she say? How could she find the words to express everything she felt without sounding desperate? She decided to wait. She wanted to see him in person, to look into his eyes and tell him the truth. She had to do it before it was too late. While Grace prepared to face her feelings, Mason, in his apartment, was contemplating his plane ticket and wondering, for the first time, if he was really making the right decision to leave her behind. Grace slammed the door of her apartment shut, her heart pounding with an urgency she had never felt before. The decision was made. She couldn't allow Mason to leave without knowing what she felt for him. Her mind repeated the words she had practiced in the mirror that morning over and over, but her hands trembled as she took her keys and headed for the car. The clock showed 7 a.m., and the city was already awake, with traffic starting to get heavy. Grace gripped the steering wheel tightly, praying that every traffic light would turn green. Her breathing was rapid, and every time she looked at the clock on the dashboard, her anxiety grew. Mason couldn't possibly be on the plane already. Please don't go yet," she murmured to herself as she maneuvered through cars and buses. The airport was 40 minutes from her house, but at that moment, it seemed like a world away. The air inside the car was heavy, as if it reflected the tension that filled her every fiber. Her mind traveled to the first moment Mason appeared in her life, the man who had comforted her on the most humiliating day of her existence. To all the times he had been there, asking for nothing in return, illuminating her dark days with his calm and constant presence. Finally, the airport lights began to appear on the horizon. Grace felt a pang of relief mixed with panic. There was still time, but she didn't know how much. She parked hastily and got out of the car, not even remembering if she had put on the handbrake. The airport lobby was full of people, families saying goodbye, hurried travelers, and curious tourists. Grace, with her prominent belly, tried to move as fast as she could, gently pushing through the crowd. A tear slid down her cheek when she thought of the possibility of not getting there in time, of losing the opportunity to tell Mason how she really felt forever. Which terminal was it? What was the airline? She thought frantically as she searched the departure screens. Her mind struggled to remember the detail Mason had mentioned casually days before, an international flight with a layover in Milan. There it was, Terminal 3, Gate 24. With renewed determination, Grace quickened her pace, ignoring the curious stares of those surprised to see a pregnant woman running through the airport. Every meter seemed like an eternity, and her breathing became more and more erratic. When she finally arrived at Gate 24, she saw Mason standing by the counter, handing his passport to the flight attendant. Her heart skipped a beat. "Mason!" she shouted with all the strength she could muster, her voice echoing in the space. Mason, with his backpack on his shoulder, slowly turned when he heard his name. His look of surprise quickly turned to one of concern as he saw her panting and clearly emotional. He put his documents on the counter and took a few steps toward her. "Grace, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice full of confusion and a hint of alarm. Grace held up a hand, trying to catch her breath. But before she could stop to think, the words began to flow. "You can't go, Mason. I can't let you leave without knowing how I feel, without telling you how important you are to me. This whole time I thought I could handle it, that I would be okay if you left. But I was wrong. I'm not okay. I won't be okay without you." The words tumbled out, and Mason's eyes filled with astonishment. Grace continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "I don't know when it happened, but I fell in love with you, Mason. I fell in love with the way you're always there, with how you make everything seem easier, even when my world is falling apart. I love you, and I don't want you to go." The silence that followed her confession was deafening. Mason stood motionless, as if trying to process what he had just heard. Their eyes met, and at that moment, something inside him seemed to break. "Grace," he began, but his voice cut off. He took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough for her to see the shine in his eyes. "You have no idea how much I've wanted to hear that," he finally said, his voice heavy with emotion. The flight attendant, still holding Mason's documents, called him, reminding him it was time to board. But Mason didn't move. His gaze was fixed on Grace, as if the entire airport had disappeared and only the two of them existed. "So what are you going to do?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. "Are you going to get on that plane and leave me here?" Mason let out a deep sigh, and in that moment, he dropped the backpack he was carrying to the floor. Without saying a word, he wrapped Grace in a hug, holding her tightly as if he never wanted to let go. Mason held her in his arms, as if the whole world depended on that moment. The bustle of the airport disappeared, and in his mind, only the two of them existed. Grace, with tears running down her face, felt for the first time in months that everything made sense, that all the pieces were finally fitting together. "I love you, Grace," Mason whispered, his voice broken with emotion. "I've loved you since the day I saw you at that altar, even when I didn't know what I was feeling. But I never thought I could be a part of your life, not in the way I really wanted to be." Grace looked at him, incredulous and moved. His words were everything she had dreamed of hearing, but she had never dared to imagine they were real. "Mason, you're already a part of my life. You always have been. I never knew how to say it. But what I feel for you is everything. It's love. It's gratitude. It's a need. It's you. It has always been you." Mason let out a shaky laugh, a mix of relief and happiness that he couldn't contain. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that," he said, gently stroking Grace's face. A boarding announcement echoed over the airport speakers, reminding him that his flight was about to depart. Mason looked toward the counter where his passport and ticket were still waiting, and then he turned his attention back to Grace. "I can't leave. I don't want to leave. Everything I need is right here, with you and with our baby." Grace let out a sigh of relief that seemed to release months of tension. "I don't want you to go, Mason. I want you to be with me, for us to be together, all three of us." Mason nodded, as if that decision had already been made the moment he saw her running into the airport. "Then I'm staying with you, forever." The two of them hugged once more, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. In that instant, everything else ceased to matter. The following months were a whirlwind of preparations for the baby's arrival and for building the life they had both decided to share. Mason moved into Grace's apartment, and together they transformed the space into a home filled with warmth and love. Every corner of the place reflected the new chapter they were beginning, from the soft colors of the baby's room to the small details Mason added to make her smile. The day the baby was born was a day full of emotions. Mason was by her side the whole time, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement. When they finally heard the baby's first cry, tears filled both their eyes. It was a boy, perfect in every way. "Welcome to the world, little one," Mason said, holding the baby for the first time. He looked at Grace with a smile that was pure love. "He's beautiful, just like his mom." Grace, exhausted but radiant, looked at him with gratitude. "And he has his daddy's strength." Weeks later, in a park near the apartment, Grace and Mason were walking with the baby in their arms. The sun was shining softly, and a light breeze was caressing their faces. The laughter and murmurs of other parents with their children filled the air. But for them, the world was condensed into that perfect moment. "You know what name I think is perfect for him?" Grace asked, looking at the sleeping baby. Mason raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What?" "Leo," she said with a smile. "Strong, but full of love. Like you." Mason looked at her with tenderness, leaning in to kiss her forehead. "Leo is perfect." In the distance behind a tree, a figure watched in silence. Jack was there, watching Grace and Mason with the baby. His heart ached as he saw the happiness on the face of the woman he had once loved and who he had lost due to his own mistakes. He wanted to approach, but something stopped him. He knew he no longer had a place in the new life she had built. With a resigned sigh, Jack turned and walked away, carrying with him the weight of what he could never get back. Meanwhile, Grace and Mason continued walking, oblivious to Jack's gaze. Their hands intertwined, and they both looked at little Leo, knowing that their story had just begun. Every step they took together was a promise of a future full of love, hope, and the certainty that they had found in each other something they could never have imagined. 5 years later, Grace and Mason's home was filled with life. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the hallways, mixing with the melody of a song Mason was gently playing on his old guitar. Little Leo, now a curious and energetic boy, was running in the garden, chasing a puppy that had recently become part of the family. Grace, with a serene smile, watched the scene from the porch, her heart full of gratitude. Life had taken unexpected turns, but every step had led her to this place, a warm home, full of love, where every day was a new opportunity to celebrate the family they had built together. Inside the house, Mason appeared at the door, carrying a 1-year-old girl with curly hair in his arms. The little girl, with eyes identical to her father's, babbled happily as she played with a lock of Mason's hair. "Leo is trying to teach the puppy to jump a fence," Mason commented with a laugh as he sat next to Grace. "I think he's more excited than the dog." Grace laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "He has your energy and my stubbornness. We're in trouble." Mason looked at her tenderly and kissed her forehead. "And he also has our love, Gabby. That's the only thing that matters." The days were no longer marked by doubts or fears, but by small moments of shared happiness. Grace and Mason had found in their union not only a deep love, but also the strength to face any challenge. The birth of their second daughter, Isabella, had added a new spark to their lives. Leo had taken on his role as a big brother with enthusiasm, always looking after his little sister with a dedication that made Grace and Mason look at him with pride. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, Grace took Mason's hand, and together they walked toward the garden. They stopped next to Leo, who was now sitting on the grass with Isabella on his lap, trying to show her how to throw a ball to the puppy. "We're lucky," Grace said in a low voice, looking at her children with eyes full of tears. "We are," Mason replied, squeezing her hand. "And it all started with you, Gabby, for having the courage to run to me that day." Grace looked at him with a smile full of love. "And because you decided to stay." At that moment, they didn't need words. Their gazes said it all: gratitude, love, and the certainty that together they could overcome anything. And so, under the starry sky, Grace, Mason, Leo, and Isabella were the perfect portrait of a united family, living each day with the certainty that they had found their happiness. Thank you for joining us on this amazing story. If you liked it, don't forget to leave your comment and like it. I love to read your opinions. Thanks for coming with us, and see you in the next story, full of emotion and love. The Vow of a Stranger. Part 2. Subscribe to the channel. We're excited to start this new chapter with you. Leave a like and a comment below about what you think of this story. The years that followed were a testament to the power of a love forged in chaos. Grace and Mason's family flourished. Their home, once a place of a shattered heart, was now a sanctuary of laughter, warmth, and quiet strength. Little Leo, their son, was now a bright and inquisitive 10-year-old, his curiosity a mirror of Grace's, and his unwavering calm a reflection of Mason's. Their daughter, Isabella, was a tiny, vivacious firecracker who adored her big brother. Their life was a seamless, happy tapestry, but as a child grows, so do their questions. One evening, as Mason was tucking Leo into bed, the boy's voice was different, softer, and filled with a rare hesitation. "Dad?" he asked. "Yes, son?" "I was talking to a friend at school today. He asked me if I look like my dad. He showed me a picture of him and his dad, and they look exactly alike. Is that how it works?" Mason's heart clenched. He had always been so careful, so ready for this moment. "Sometimes, honey," he replied, his voice calm. "Sometimes sons look like their fathers. We just have a different story." "What story?" Leo asked, his big eyes searching Mason's face. Mason looked at him, and for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of the old fear. He had promised Grace he would always be honest with Leo, but this was a different kind of honesty. It was a step into a past they had so carefully moved on from. The next day, Mason and Grace sat Leo down. They told him the story of how they had met, the story of the wedding day, and the truth about his biological father, Jack. They spoke with a tenderness that made the painful details a little easier to bear. Leo listened quietly, his small face unreadable. When they were finished, he looked at them. "So, is he still out there?" he asked. "Jack? Is he still around?" If you were Grace or Mason, how would you answer Leo's question? Would you be honest and tell him, Or would you try to protect him from the truth? The question hung in the air. Grace and Mason had to face a new and unexpected challenge. Jack was a ghost from their past. A man who had chosen to walk away. But now he was a part of Leo's identity, and a part that their son deserved to know. After many long, heartfelt talks, they made a difficult decision. They would try to find Jack. They knew this was a risk. It could unravel the peace they had built, but they knew it was the right thing to do for their son. Finding him was easier than they thought. He was still in the city, but he had changed. He had given up his career and was now a quiet, reserved man who worked as a teacher. He was living a life of quiet atonement. When Grace's call came, he was speechless. "Grace," he said, his voice a ghost of the man he once was. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, Jack," Grace replied, her voice filled with a strength she didn't know she had. "Our son Leo wants to meet you." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. A few days later, they met at a quiet park, a neutral territory. Grace and Mason walked toward the meeting spot, holding hands, their hearts beating in unison. Jack was already there. He was older, his face lined with quiet regret. He looked at them with a mixture of fear and awe. "Thank you for coming," Mason said, his voice calm but firm. Grace looked at him, and for the first time she truly understood the depth of his love. He was willing to face the man who had abandoned the woman he loved, all for the sake of their son. The meeting was a whirlwind of emotions. Jack spoke with a raw honesty that moved them all. He told Leo how sorry he was for not being there, and that he had been too scared to be the man he needed to be. Leo, with his quiet wisdom, listened. He didn't ask for a new father. He just needed to know the man who was a part of his past. The meeting was short, but it gave Leo something he hadn't known he needed: closure. What do you think Leo should feel right now? Should he be angry at Jack, or should he forgive him? Share your thoughts below. That night, as Grace and Mason were putting Leo to bed, he hugged them both tightly. "I'm so glad I met him," he whispered. "I'm not angry. I needed to know. And now I do. You guys are my parents, and I love you." The past was no longer a ghost to be feared. It was a part of their story, a chapter that had to be read to truly understand the beauty of the rest of the book. The next morning, Grace and Mason stood at the window, watching Leo and Isabella playing in the garden, their laughter filling the air. Their family was not just a result of a love story, but a victory over pain, loss, and fear. Thank you for joining us on this amazing journey. If you liked it, don't forget to leave your comment and like it. I love to read your opinions. Thanks for coming with us, and see you in the next story full of emotion and love. The Vow of a Stranger, an epilogue. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you for following Grace and Mason's journey. Your support means the world to us. Please leave a like and a comment below with your favorite part of this story. Decades passed, each year weaving itself into the beautiful tapestry of Grace and Mason's life. The family, which began with a broken heart and a promise, had grown into a legacy of love and unwavering strength. Little Leo, the boy who once held his father's gaze with quiet questions, was now a grown man. He was a brilliant architect, designing homes that felt like sanctuaries, a reflection of the peace he had found. He was a loving father himself, and his children, a curious little boy and a compassionate daughter, were a testament to the values he was raised with. He embodied the best of both his parents, Grace's boundless empathy and Mason's quiet, steady presence. He had, years ago, found a quiet peace with Jack, a relationship built not on blood, but on a shared past that had to be understood to be released. Jack remained a distant part of their story, a humble reminder of forgiveness and growth. Isabella, now a successful artist, filled her world with the vibrant colors and joyful chaos of her childhood. She painted scenes of warm kitchens, playful gardens, and families gathered around a table, her art an homage to the beautiful, imperfect life her parents had created. One crisp autumn afternoon, decades after that fateful day, Grace and Mason sat together on a porch swing. Their hands were intertwined, and they watched their children and grandchildren laughing in the garden. Mason's hair was a distinguished silver, and Grace's face was lined with the joy of a life well lived. "Remember that day, Mason?" Grace whispered, her voice soft with memory. "The wedding, the rain. I thought my life was over." Mason squeezed her hand. "I remember, but it was just the beginning. I knew it the moment I saw you." "I was so lost," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I had no idea what to do. I was terrified." "You weren't alone," Mason replied, his voice a steady comfort. "You never were. That day, I made a promise to a stranger, a promise to help a woman who was hurting. But I didn't know then that she would be the one to heal me." They watched their family a moment longer, a beautiful, loud, and vibrant scene. The boy who was meant to be raised by a family of one had a father who chose him, and a mother who found her strength in him. The man who had vowed to a stranger had found his purpose and his home. The woman who had been left alone had found a love more profound than any she could have imagined. Do you believe that some people are destined to find each other, even after facing immense challenges? Do you think love can heal all wounds? Let us know what you think in the comments. Their story wasn't just about a man and a woman who fell in love. It was about a vow that a stranger kept, a truth that set a family free, and a love that proved that the most beautiful beginnings can rise from the ashes of a life that was supposed to be. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, watching their family live out their happiness, Grace knew that the vow of a stranger had been the best promise of her life. Thank you for joining us on this amazing story. We hope it resonated with you and reminded you that even in the darkest moments, love can find a way. We love to read your opinions and thoughts. Until the next story.